Hello, welcome. This is another late night spiel. This one in particular is say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and shalom. Um, First off, this is really inspired by something that I've been really thinking about in depth because as I think a lot of young people these days, they want to be attached to ideals that are considered radical, and this can be across the spectrum, right? There's people that are the radical fringes of political beliefs such as communism and fascism. I think I would consider as political beliefs. There's also people hyper capitalists, I like to call them. They believe are basically that the free market should just exist with no regulations whatsoever, yada yada yada. There's conservative radicals, and conservative radicals can fall into many different religions or ideas, but they at the end of the day, they believe in a conservative, usually that ties around the concept of quote unquote family values, keeping things in place of the way that they are or going back to the way that things that they are. There's radical liberals, and as far as they're or progress, I like to call them progressives. They call themselves progressives, but really what they're quote unquote progressing, what they consider progress is eliminating any traditions that do not fit their narrative, eliminating any religions that do not fit their narrative, or eliminating any laws that do not fit their narrative of what a quote progressive society is. And if you want to understand what a progressive, a lot of them come from, I think there's one in particular ideology that you need to understand. This is going to be really targeted at what quote progressivism, because a lot of progressivism is basically I used to think it's conspiracy theory, but in this day and age, this is not a slander or anything like that. This is actually what a lot of them actually want to do. A lot of quote unquote progressives really are pushing not socialism in and of itself, because I think that socialism does have a lot of good programs of how economy should work and how a society should run. But unfortunately, really what you're seeing now is just full on support for actual communism, full blown communism. Now, some people can argue that socialism becomes communism. I'm not going to get into that. This in particular is the concept of straight up communism, right? So there's actually U.S. cities that actually have statues to communist leaders, in particular Vladimir Lenin, which I consider is very, very troubling. And I didn't really know this until I did my research. I think one's in Seattle right now. And it's kind of troubling because considering that if you live in a country and America history is brutal, it's racist. We already know that. Anybody with a brain knows that America has a troubled history. It doesn't take any rocket science to figure that. You know what I mean? However, what I think is troubling is that you somehow think that Vladimir Lenin is the solution to the problems the historical grievances that America has suffered from. And I used to actually, when I was younger, I used to revere a lot of communist leaders too, because, you look at these guys are revolutionaries. They changed the oppressive systems that they were from. They were about uniting the proletariat and, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then, the proletariat is like working class, the common man and things like that. However, if you do a lot of history into these guys, they actually are, aren't quote unquote good people. Because, you look at like how you have to think the liberal media really paints certain people as being inherently bad people, right? Like look at the, a lot of the movies right there, like, oh, this person's a misogynist, this person's a sexist, they did this, they did that, yada, yada, yada. But there's people that have actually funded ideals and started movements that were about using extreme violence in order to attain power. And then once they attained that power, they used extreme violence to suppress any dissent in their voices. And then these same people claim, oh, we care about human freedom and human rights. Well, communist regimes, honestly, have some of the worst human rights abuses in the 20th century during the time that they were in power. And some of them that still are here today, including, the CCP, have some of the worst human rights abuses that they're doing right now. And you will never really see communist organizations really call that out, though, or talk about the human rights abuses of communist China, because a lot of them are actually funded by them, including a lot of American businesses and associations and politicians, unfortunately, here in the U.S. So that was just the intro. So basically, this video is to talk about if communism is a religion. So first off, in order to do that, right, we have to consider what is communism, like what or what is a religion? First off, sorry. So what is a religion? So if you Google what is a religion, there's 3 different definitions that are according to the Oxford Languages Dictionary, right? And this is, if you type in any kind of definition, this is probably going to be the first result. So there's one, that's kind of self-explanatory. Everybody kind of believes that this is the general definition. It's considered a noun. It's the religion is the belief in and worship a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods, right? Second one, a particular system of faith and worship, right? And then third is the one that I'm going to use. And I think it's actually pretty important because as, the quote unquote progressives, and they like to, adapt definitions over time, but they don't like people using that back against them because over time, I think the way we understand certain concepts changes. So what is the definition of religion maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago is different than now. Because if you look at celebrity worship, if you look at musician worship, things like that, people worship all different kinds of things, art and things like that. They worship the individuals and the work of these individuals, and they put up to a pedestal as being something greater than themselves. So in my opinion, that actually is peculiar that they actually do that. But if they look at when they think about the concept of religion, it's always this old timey thing of about a big super god or something like that, or some guy with a horse head or something. That's what the idea of the religion. But religion is about faith and worship, right? So they have faith, obviously, in certain political ideologies and institutions, and faith in the intentions of individuals that push these agendas, right? So let me take it to an example. Say that example again. Actually, I didn't say it the first time. So religion, a pursuit or interest to which somebody ascribes supreme importance. And it uses an example. Consumerism is the new religion. And we live in a capitalist society, right? So that wouldn't be something crazy to say. People worship consumerism, capitalism, and the free market, the stock market, and things like that. People worship these things, and they put them on the pedestal as being the finest of humanity, like human achievement and civilization, right? The fact that we have a free market and that there's an ebb and flow. We have an unlimited access to resources and goods based upon how much money and capital that we attain, right? I mean, some people only dreamed about this system, and that's when they implemented it. And the people that run the country, or the top 1% and stuff like that, they obviously believe in this as a religion, right? Because according to maybe their actual belief systems, like let's say they're a Christian or something like that or whatever, they like to pretend that they are, but actually do they follow the teachings of Jesus Christ and with what the things they invest in, the policies that they pass, the wars that they fund, things like that, like do they really actually follow what they stand for? So they use consumerism as that example. And I think that if you can use consumerism as an example of a new religion, you can definitely use communism. If you want to look into communism came out in the 19th century. It was, Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx were basically are kind of considered the creators of the modern concept of communism, because people want to they'll go back to several different instances. Like a lot of communists will say, oh well, there's this the godfather of communism, from this idea, this and idea. No, I'm not going to get into that. I may do that a little bit later, but basically we're doing that, from the Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, I think are the pinnacle, the Bible and the Quran of communism, right? Yeah, I mean, the Torah, the Bible, Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, whatever you like to call it, these are the foundations of modern communism. So if you notice you see any pictures, right, of like the communist movements, what's one thing that you'll always notice if you look at their marches and their gatherings and stuff? You always notice they have portraits of Friedrich Engels and Marx and Lenin in particular, especially later on. But in the beginning, they would always march with these figures, right? And why would you march with these figures, these pictures of dead guys, right? Because I mean, even like, for instance, you look at the Muslim community, or the Ummah, we don't walk around with freaking pictures of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Obviously, that's a completely sacrilege. We acknowledge that that's a form of shirk and idol worship, right? That's even if it's respectable, we look at that as being a gateway to shirk and idol worship, right? And the worship of something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's obvious, right? Certain Christians, for instance, they didn't look. There was a iconoclast movement, right? So even Christians, even though they worship Jesus Christ, right, they were very adamant about churches. I know it was really big in the Eastern Orthodox Church in particular. I think there's a whole movement of it where they, and then you look at the Protestant Reformation too. They went out of their way to destroy portraits and depictions of Christ, right, because they viewed it as a form of idol worship, which they were going straight by the scriptures, and the history of, if you use the Bible as a tool of history or a piece of history, they looked upon like, oh, hey, the Israelites, look at this, the history of the golden calf and all this idol worship that the Israelites end up getting tempted by, and the Canaanites did, and the Philistines did, Moloch, things like that. All these pagan gods, what they usually do was they had a picture of them, and they would worship that picture as being an image of their deity, and they would also create statues, give offerings to it, things like that. That's why I also think it's kind of puzzling when there's a statue of somebody and people are tossing roses to the statue and things like that. I think that's kind of that borderlines like idol worship. And if you actually pay attention to idol worship, in particular like Hindus, for instance, that's their thing, right? And this is no diss to Hindus whatsoever, but if you look at a lot of Hindus, and I'm not talking on my butt, but look at it like Hindu ceremonies and stuff like that. They'll toss flowers to their gods. They'll give offerings to their gods and the statues, right? What that means to me, that means that's a form of shirk and idol worship and stuff like that. Maybe to them it means something else, but their religion is completely different. It's a polytheistic religion. I know a lot of them say, oh, this is from the Godhead Brahman and things like that, but for the most part, they have different gods and goddesses that they worship in that form. Modern day Buddhist. Now, there's the old school Buddhists and then the more radical Buddhists that like the Zen Buddhists and stuff like that. The early Buddhists didn't sit around and worship a freaking statue of the Buddha. That the Buddha didn't want to be worshipped. The Buddha was revered. But nobody was in the beginnings of Buddhism always going up to a Buddha statue and praying to it and giving offerings to the Buddha. Like the Buddha was a god. The Buddha was never supposed to be a god. The Buddha was supposed to be an enlightened one that achieved nirvana. That was something that people were wanting to attain, right? But yeah, you see, of course, people like human beings that we love deviating from the original concept of whatever faith because we're egotistical. We want to do things our way, right? Regardless of the inventor and founder of a respective faith, whatever they decided how it was going to be, we deviate from that. That's why, there's a concept of innovation, bid'ah, which I think is a really important concept that we have as an ummah that we watch out for, because if you look at almost every single faith on the face of the earth, there's a huge problem with the people that did their original teachings and then the future generations, them deciding to do their own thing and deviate so far away from what the original teachings was to where it's not even recognizable. Some people say that's a good thing, especially a lot of progressive. When they try to do is go change religions to fit their narrative. I'll quote modernism and liberalism and things like that. That's something they really love to do. And, and not everybody's perfect. Like the most pious person of any religion is obviously going to do and deviate things in their personal decisions and actions that are not in sync with that religion, because we're human beings, we make mistakes. But it's when you're intentionally changing your belief system, not your actions of what you do, your sins or whatever like that, or your shortcomings. We're deliberately changing your actual beliefs to fit whatever you think is right, even though they're set in stone and there's these rules and guidelines, these standards, then that can be very problematic, right? So I'm gonna get to communism in particular on that same notion, right? So you really think that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wanted to be walked around with, have statues towards them and stuff like that, and be revered almost semi-divine or actually somewhat divine, right? I don't think so, but considering of how they talked about religion, right? I mean, these guys considered religion to be the opiate of the masses. These guys were against religion. They hated the family. And Karl Marx, this is no conspiracy theory. Google it. Karl Marx hated the family, which is the basic foundation of any society and civilization is the family. Whether it be a nuclear family, extended family, it doesn't matter. Like the family is very important. For him to just straight up say, "Hey, I don't believe in the family. I do not trust the family." And also, the dude also, even though he was Jewish, he also said a lot of anti-Semitic things against his own people, which makes no sense to me. Like that's kind of crazy. Maybe he was a quote unquote quote self-hating Jew or something like that. But I'm not going to get into the history of Karl Marx and his personal beliefs. I'm just going to talk about the concepts that he created, right? So if you look at, in Russia right now, still to this day, Vladimir Lenin's body was embalmed, and people still go there and visit, and a lot of communists still flock to it and pay respects. To me, that is straight up just worshiping, like that's a form of like worship, like using faith. And they have faith in the communist system, right? So faith is not just believing in something that doesn't exist, right? Because true communism, even in the societies of where the communist regimes were, they never attained true communism. And in fact, communists will use that as an excuse for the Cold War, right? Well, all these human rights abuses and all the murders and all the, the gulags, the genocides that existed under communist regimes, that wasn't true communism. So blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay, well, true communism existed. And the biggest chance that communism for it to exist failed miserably within less than 100 years for most of the countries, with the exception of China and North Korea, right? It's kind of funny. But anyway, so yeah, communists do have a faith in a system that is greater than themselves. They consider communism to be the peak solution to all of the world's problems, right? And that's what the Communist Manifesto and the Das Kapital were about. Now, communism is different. It's kind of weird. Communists will consider it economic. Some communists will consider it more of an economic system. Some consider it a political movement. Some consider it ideology. You'll get so many different communists that say all different kinds of things. Literally, that there's communists that fought other freaking communists just as much as different branches of Islam fought each other. Different branches of Christianity fought each other. So even if that's when you think about it, it's kind of ironic. Because these same people that act like it's not a religion, they have a lot more common religions than they do. Guy with the originator of the concept comes out and says, "Oh, hey, this is communism," and then within a couple of generations, people say, "No, this is true communism. No, that's true communism." And then these people hate each other and they want to kill each other, just like pretty much every other religion, right? And before people want to get on here and say I'm a fascist, I will do a video on fascism too. I consider fascism to be a religion also. I mean, we got people doing salutes and praising images of their respective dictator and worshiping literally their dictator as being infallible and godlike. What's any different than a religion that, But anyway, this is just about communism. So people still go up to Vladimir Lenin's. Well, people would probably go up to John Lennon's grave and worship that dude too. People worship the freaking Beatles on the ground they work on. That's something completely different though. But people worship the grave and the body of and highly revere and give respects to the body of Vladimir Lenin, who's been dead for at least 85 years, right? So is that not somewhat religious? Is that somewhat not religious, huh? Is also having a faith in a system as being the pinnacle of human civilization. And even if you know that this belief system has a very problematic history of being implemented, you still follow it. Just like, religious people. Hey, what's up, Nicer? Hey, you're on a roll today. Hey, thanks for stopping by. You made my day. So I don't know if you caught the rest of my live, but what I'm talking about this one is communism considered a religion or not? And to catch you up to speed, because everybody's got all their free time, and free time is sacred. So I was going by the definition of the Oxford Dictionary definition of religion, right? So there's 3 separate definitions of religion. One is the belief and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. The second one is a particular system of faith and worship. And the third, and the one that I'm using, and the second one kind of ties into a little bit too. The third one is a pursuit or interest to which somebody ascribes supreme importance. And it gives an example saying, quote unquote, consumerism is the new religion, as somebody being quoted as saying that, right? And if you look at that, I mean, that's what a lot of communists do. They basically have an extreme amount of faith in the communist system and communist ideals. And if they were implemented, basically, they think that communism will be a utopia, a heaven on earth, right? And then two, they worship and highly revere the founders of this faith-based system. So I don't know if you know this, but in Russia, in Moscow, the body of Vladimir Lenin has been preserved, and people still to this day go up to it and look at it in awe. Some people pay respects, lay flowers, and things like that, even after the communist regime has fallen. Like, communists still go there and do that. And people, you know, if there's any communist parades or any communist rallies, one thing they love to do is a lot of them will have portraits of different communist leaders, and even at some of their homes, because I have been at the homes of communists, they'll have pictures of Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Chairman Mao, you know, all these communist figures, and they will revere the images of these figures. And if you actually look at a lot of like documentaries on communism, right, because communists like to say, oh, you know, they're all biased and stuff, like when they actually show documentation from communist states of their leaders, right, one thing they always do is like in the homes of every communist family is a picture of their respective leader. They praise it, you know, and it's a very cult-like ideology. So the reason I decided to do this video is I wanted to point out the hypocrisy of some people that think that they're not religious, but they believe in religious concepts. Like, the concepts and ideologies they have the same faith-based system and the same reverence and same structure that religion has, because you have the founder. Yeah. So communism. So basically, if communism, whatever isn't a religion, now it would be the future of religion. So that's what some of them kind of argue. We'll see, like, if you look at a lot of people that don't believe in any religions, right? And this is no shout out, this is no diss to anybody that's atheist or agnostic whatsoever, right? But a lot of people that are involved in progressive organizations, what they try to do is say, hey, religion is old, it's outdated, it has morals that are, and I'm sorry for the smoke alarm again. I'm going to change it tomorrow, I promise. But anyway, that these concepts are old and outdated, and they need to be adapted to the modern world. So that's basically where a lot of the concept of communism came from, is they said, oh, these religious organization and religion as an institution has held back humanity and the working class and things like that. So we're going to create a revolutionary system that's going to get rid of all that, create a utopia on earth and things like that. So in my opinion, just like how I used consumerism as being the new religion, people say that, right? American capitalism and American consumerism is considered the religion of the modern era. I think eventually people will gradually understand that ideologies, right, are no different than religions, right? I can have like for instance, like, let's say I'm a Nazi, right? Nazis look at Adolf Hitler as being the best human being that's ever lived on the earth. A lot of them, right? Even if he, you know, was the reason they lost the war. You know, Nazis look at Adolf Hitler as being the pinnacle of what a good Aryan white man is, and they put him on a pedestal. And a lot of Nazis worship Adolf Hitler. They literally look up to his image. They kiss his photo. They want to name their kids after him. They dress like him. You know, things like that. They look at the symbol of swastika and stuff like that, which in and of itself is a religious symbol that they adopted to have the reverence and the power and the symbolism of a religious organization. But they wouldn't consider themselves a religion because they don't have a church, right? I mean, that you know, that's what I'm kind of getting at. So yeah, basically, if you look at also the roots of communism, right? There was a lot of communists go back to the French Revolution, right? And a lot of communists look upon the French Revolution as the first true revolution, because the American Revolution, people just look at that as like, that was a bunch of just white guys that didn't want to pay taxes, right? So the French Revolution, they look upon as like, that was a working class and the peasants rising up against an oppressive force, which was the French monarchy, the corrupt, decadent French monarchy. So the very first targets, honestly, of the revolution, besides the royalty, was the church, the Catholic Church, for various reasons. And I'm not going to defend the Catholic Church for, you know, the grievances that they created during that time period, because there was a lot of grievances, such as, you know, the church owned a bunch of land, amassed all this wealth, the people were dirt poor, and things like that. And so there was a lot of grievances that they had against the church. A lot of these weren't theological based. They were solely based upon the status of where they were in comparison to the church. So they went out of their way when the revolution started to attack the priests. They would attack the priests, take the church's property, attack nuns, priests, and things like that whenever they saw them, right? And so the Robespierre, who was the radical leader of the Jacobins, I believe, he started a movement to get rid of religion. And what he was going to replace it was the quote unquote cult of the supreme being, right? And so they said, hey, we want to get rid of all religion and we want to create a brand new religion of the cult of the supreme being. And basically, they wanted to get revolutionary concepts of the ideal man and worshiping this utopia that they were going to create through the revolution. So your question is valid, and I think it's not that it's a future religion. I just think that it just already it has been for the last almost 200 years since the inception of communism. It has always been a religion. That's what I'm arguing. Is that it's always been a religion because the precepts of it are functioning in the same way. They have the originators, and they're revered as being the originators, and they're highly revered. They're borderline worship as gods. If not, for some people, they're pretty much treated the same way as gods, as being infallible and unquestioning, right? And then you have the tenets that they had that people follow to a T the best they can, and they implement them with the same reverence as religious people do. Like they say, hey, society has to run this way. Here's what's good. Here's what's evil. And if you don't apply by these rules, you're going to suffer punishments for them, whether it be physical, financial, or legal, right? So maybe, this is kind of like a heady concept. And I think it would be better if I had more of a multimedia display of, hey, here's a brief history of communism and this and that, because these videos, because they're very political, people will jump on and say, that's not real communism. You don't know what you're talking about, this and that. I don't have a degree in freaking communism, but I did study history, and not only college, but throughout my life, I'm self-educated in history. So one thing, that I want to specialize in is the history of the 20th century. If you look at the 20th century, the Cold War and the World Wars were the pinnacle and the most important events that happened during that time frame that shaped the world that we're currently in. So I'll keep this short and sweet. Thank you so much for coming on, Nicer. One of these days, I'm going to have panels. So if you catch me on a live, if you want to jump on and you want to interject, if you want to have a one-on-one in the future, especially, by all means, I'll help create something. I'm trying to figure out my schedules on what would be a good time to have sit downs and individual one-on-ones with everyone. And I don't think I will have. Do you think the USF were a dumb Christianity or not? I think so. When you look at the state of Christianity right now, this is no diss to anybody that follows it, but if you look at how people practice Christianity now, it is. This is my personal opinion. On a theological level, it is completely different than what Christianity, if you actually read the Bible and stuff like that, than how Christian society, the first Christian societies operated. And, a lot of people are kind of denial about that. But if you look at the history of, for instance, stuff like Christmas has nothing to do with Christianity as far as the day it's celebrated and the way it's implemented, because Eastern Orthodox Christians don't celebrate Christmas on the same day that other Christians do. And you wonder why. And there's other Christians that don't even celebrate Christmas. In the fact, the people that the first Christians that landed in America, the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they didn't celebrate Christmas at all because they knew the history of Christmas. And it wasn't until later in our history that it became more socially acceptable to celebrate Christmas. But the people that founded the country actually, the first settlers from Europe didn't even celebrate Christmas. So that's actually pretty interesting that people look at it. But I mean, what's acceptable in Christianity now, for instance, you could have LGBT plus priests, LGBT plus pastors, LGBT plus centered programs. There's certain things you can't criticize anymore. A lot of churches, they don't really talk about doctrine anymore. What they do is just, it's kind of bland and very secular. and you look at the daily lives of a lot of what, like, quote unquote, like Christians, like things that they support. They'll support interest, which is something that original Christians did not support. Let's see. Some Christians also, on top of celebrating Christmas, they'll celebrate Halloween, which is completely nothing to do with Christianity, right? Completely nothing to do with Christianity. So I think that eventually the U.S. will dump Christianity. It won't be a formal thing. It won't be like you'll ever see a U.S. president say Christianity is bad or Christianity doesn't exist or something like that. You may see an atheist president become president. Of course, that's a possibility. You may see a president of any religion get big eventually. However, I think you'll eventually see just eventually it is already kind of at that point right now where religion is not considered important in people's lives whatsoever anymore. It's considered important when you want to run for office and act like you're a good person and you're a moral person. But in practice, unfortunately, I think the vast majority of people in this country identify with religion on a cultural standpoint, but they don't practice anything that has to do with it. I'm not perfect. I'll be the first person to admit that I don't practice the best that I can. But there's some things that are considered big sins and little sins. Now, if you compare, there's some sins that, if regards to what religion you're in, there's some sins and some things that you do that are considered heinous and terrible and almost unforgivable. I try to stay away from those things, but there's people with no shame these days that don't even stay away from that. You'll have Christians that will, support somebody or listen to somebody that openly worships the devil. Like this person's like loves Satan. You know what I mean? You'll see people because they want to be cool, and when they fit in, they'll listen to their music, they'll go to their concerts and stuff. And it's kind of scary. Like, and that's a struggle I have now because I used to listen to a bunch of music that could be considered problematic. I used to listen to a lot of heavy metal, punk rock and stuff. Now I'm really conscious of the stuff I listen to because, like, why am I going to sit over and pay a dude that worships the devil and support them when they're at the antithesis, the exact opposite of the moral standing that I have right now? You have to be accountable for supporting the things that you support. So yeah, it's very troubling and very hard to do because our culture is basically so secular, and basically it has nothing. Our American culture has nothing to do with religion whatsoever. It has to do with the almighty dollar, fitting in, and sex and money. It's like sex, money, and having a good time is the American experience. And it's at the sacrifice of everything in between that. So, yeah, that answers your question, and that's sufficient. Yeah, please let me know. But let's see how much deep am I into this right now. I'm going to keep these short and sweet. Thank you so much, Nicer, for showing up. I hope that answers your question. For showing up. It's good to see people from the get-go support this kind of material. It's really awesome. I'll make sure I make you a mod when I figure this thing out. I don't know how to do that yet. But yeah, everybody that supports this from the jump, I'll make them a mod. If there's any subjects that, oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate that you like the answer. So I'm going to type in my email in the chat. When this is over, if you have any questions or there's anything you think that I would be cool for me to talk about, by all means, because I want to be a multifaceted channel. I don't want to just talk about tinfoil hat stuff or politics, religion. I just like believe it or not, I like to have fun. I like to have fun just like everybody else. You know what I'm saying? So I like to talk about fun stuff. I think I'm a funny dude. You know what I'm saying? So there is my email. Right there. Take that down, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for showing up. It means a lot, especially with this COVID lockdown. There isn't a lot of person-on-person connection that I really have that much anymore. This is the only social media that I have. I don't have Instagram, Facebook for various reasons or whatever like that. But I try to stay on the YouTube because it's a good source of entertainment and information and connecting with people. Hopefully it stays that way for a while. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care. Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for your support.